Why do some people stay loyal to lives that are clearly destroying them? No, really. Really. Why do people stay in dead relationships, dead careers, dead identities, long after they know and understand that something is indeed wrong? And why does walking away and letting go of the past feel almost impossible sometimes for people? Most people think it's a weakness in some way, shape, or form. But what if, just what if, it's something far deeper than that? What if people stay in that old connection to who they are because they've already invested too much of themselves to actually turn back? They invested time, they invested pain, effort, years, and they've invested their whole identity behind it. That is where the slippery slope actually happens. Because once a person sacrifices enough for something, their brain starts looking at how they dealt with the sacrifice, and they need to protect that in some way, shape, or form, even if the sacrifice is actually hurting them, even if it's killing them, even if it keeps them stuck in the past. That is the sunk cost identity. And honestly, a lot of people are living inside of it. So you see it everywhere. You know, the guy who hates his career, but he keeps going because he already spent 20 years building it. And that's why companies create things like a 401k. They keep you invested. They call it the golden handcuffs in the career circles, keeping you locked in. What about the woman who stays in a miserable relationship? Because we've already been together this long, might as well keep on going. Or the YouTube influencer who no longer enjoys social media whatsoever, but keeps posting because of their identity depends on that attention and putting it out there. Or what about the person who completely outgrew their friend group years ago, but then somehow keeps pretending, and the group is no longer there anymore? Why? Well, because leaving would actually force people to take a hard look at a strong and terrifying question. What if all those years were actually wasted? That is what people think. But the people who say time has been wasted sometimes don't realize the insights and the wisdom that were acquired over time. And it is that very question that crushes the ego of people. What if all those years were wasted? So what do when they hear that in their brain? They double down. They become very tired. They keep pushing, and they're eventually disconnecting from who they are even more, maybe even go into isolation, and they may get tied into how they perform in front of other people. But some people would rather continue to suffer than to actually admit the truth, to admit the idea that this no longer serves you and this no longer fits who you are. And social media could actually make that even worse, because now people don't just invest time into identities, they actually broadcast them even more publicly. And now that becomes even more of an investment, a bigger double down, a bigger and more heavier investment. So imagine just spending 10 years building an image online, several different avatars, the confident person, the perfect couple, the motivational person, the entrepreneur, the fitness addict, or maybe even the healed person. We don't really know. But what happens? What happens when that whole self-image stops feeling important? What happens when you actually change? The person behind the image starts to change. And you may not even know that it's time to just let go of that character that you've been playing, that avatar that you've been. Because the audience out there, your audience would expect consistency. Even if your identity is emotionally suffocating, it's still consistent. Because everything we do is consistent with our behavior. It's the story of the frog and the scorpion. And that's the part that no one talks about. Some people are not really protecting their happiness. They're just protecting their investment. They're protecting what they've been dumping their time into for years, even though it doesn't suit them anymore. And they may fail to realize it, or they realize it and fail to do anything about it because of the fact that there's some kind of secondary gain or benefit that comes from it. And that's where secondary gain comes in. Because when your identity actually gets tied to the very sacrifice of things, And people stop asking the question of, is this healthy? They don't look at it that way. They don't look at it as, is this healthy for you anymore? They start to say, should I continue doing this? Should I continue to mentally justify doing this? And then what happens is if red flags actually happen, they wind up ignoring the red flags. So what they do is they rationalize it. They rationalize it to make it come out right in their head. They rationalize it to make themselves stay when they should have left long ago. And if you have to admit the truth, that would actually be admitting that you became somebody that you no longer want to be. And that's what really is upsetting, especially when the old part of who you are really worked so hard to get where you are. You know, you got the respect, you got the status, you got the attention, you got all of that. But now you feel you're totally tied and torn between two pains, the pain of staying the way you are or the pain of starting over. A lot of people just choose staying. It's that old comfortable sneaker that they want to continue to wear, even though it really is falling apart. So you could actually watch it all happen. People become dead in their face while they're still doing certain things. They're trying to push their excitement. They're just going with the emotions over and over again, going with the routines. They're tired. They're not just burnt out from doing the work per se. We can understand that their identity has come to a full stop and they no longer want to do it anymore. That's why some people just suddenly disappear, completely gone. Change careers, move away, end a relationship, delete your accounts, whatever the case may be. Once they find what they're looking for and they finally found it, then, they can move on. But some people have to feel a great deal of pain before they change their identity. They have to feel a great deal of pain until they reach some kind of breaking point. It's an interesting idea, and it's worthy of diving into. And just because you invested tons of years into something really doesn't mean that you have to continue it for the rest of your entire life. You don't have to continue the relationship, the identity, the career, whatever the case may be. You can become honest about who you are now, and that means letting go of just dead relationships, letting go of people that have passed away, and that is the real strong part about it. If you've become so tied to your role, you forgot how shapeable and moldable the identity really is. It's more malleable than we imagine it to be. You've become so committed to it that you forgot about who you really are underneath. That is the danger. It's not about making a mistake or failing or being seen a certain way. It's not about that at all. Where it's difficult for you is starting over from ground zero. Not realizing that sometimes ground zero can have a massive benefit. Have a great day. See you on the next episode. You can check out my video on the sunk cost identity on YouTube. And it's exclusive, so it won't be here, but you can catch it over there. Have a great day. See you in the next one.